And then we're dealing with the in-between stasis codes of the star seeds and the peripheral events of something going into a quantum age. Now, what goes into the technological scenes that deal with the reverse psi effect through the polarity scores that pull these beings out of definition will help alleviate a lot of the negative processes that are going on here. There are anonymous effects that are being taken over upon the planet, and these entities are not good entities.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 42. Blue, how are you?
I'm good today, Mike.
Hey, what are we going to talk about today in episode 42?
The things we'll be discussing about is the SCP, but more of an integrity code of reality sync and what that correlates with. Megalomania 5004. There are extra information data speeds that coordinate with what Gorman, Biden, and the certain administrations and their points of effect are ended up having to go downwards for. And this creation of a certain sync against principles that are creating negative realities upon themselves can be something of a transversal effect. This transversal effect, if you will, it neurally interlinks with the psyche-awareness streams and the authorical status codes of other types of beings and or graphical imageries itself.
Sounds like we got a lot to talk about there today. I'm excited. Before we do, though, make sure you go ahead and like, subscribe, and click on notifications so you're notified when we post new material. Blue, let's go ahead. Let's get right into it.
Yes, reality syncs to counteract reality bending and anonymous effects itself, per se. It's like sentient or insentient beings. It removes a certain elevation effects through that. So if you're going into the anonymous abilities that are being correlated through negative aspects, this is a counteraction to such. So we're thinking about nullifying something that on its own perception mode has caused a bad redox form on the current realm and the current timeline itself. And as such, with certain reality syncs, it can ultimately return a dimensional sequencing back into another database stream. Warping such negative beings out of perceptive. This is a real technology out there, but it is something that more or less will create a good benefit to current realms that are currently being taken over on a negative stance.
What are these other things you'd sent me here, these notes on Project X, Delta, and Alpha Omega code?
Yeah, so that is in a correlation sphere that could self-diagnose in an aerodynamic stream and a communicative platform through possible even Arctech and cymatic screens effects to relaying certain negative apertures out of existence. So that way it's not causing a negative redax form upon the initial realm itself. There are actual electromagnetic wavelengths that designate through the DNA spectrums of many of the holograms that portray here. And depending on that frequency outlet stream, depends on if you're good, bad, or in between. There are more negative outputs being self-diagnosed upon the alpha stream here than there are positive. To return a coordinator right for a zoning area, you need to maintain that the neural standard waves and electromagnetic infusal waves are being brought back proper again. The reason why I say that is because everything's run on an electromagnetic field currency. and it could affect the polarity lines of the neural standard waves upon oneself.
You know, this is amazing to me because you just brought up the Arctech, and we just talked about that in 41. And then if you go back quite a few shows, folks, you'll find SCP-5004 Megalomania, the Gorman. You'll find all that information. And when you go back and look at videos, you can see everything's indexed, so it's easy for you to find. You just press on that number next to the topic we talked about, and you'll be taken right there. So if you're new to the show, or you want to go back and go, yeah, I remember them talking about that. What were they saying? You go right back to that show, and you click on the number right next to it. It's so easy, and I do that all the time. I do that every week at least. Can you tell me more about the megalomania part of this?
Well, megalomania starts and stands for the top-notch aperture, which would be John Donald Trump. And then we're dealing with Gorman, which is the Archdemon himself, which is Biden. And then we're dealing with the in-between stasis codes of the star seeds and the peripheral events of something going into a quantum age. Now, what goes into the technological scenes that deal with the reverse psi effect through the polarity scores that pull these beings out of definition will help alleviate a lot of the negative processes that are going on here. There are anonymous effects that are being taken over upon the planet, and these entities are not good entities. So you got to think about 3 different events going on with SCP-5004. The good, the bad, and then the in-between. Dealing with the good side, or even Don had to expose certain things. So his side kind of goes and proposes between the acclamation of the Republic stands, human standards, and the acclamation of the cosmic divine standards, which goes into the extraterrestrial modes in Space Force. There are 2 split lateral terms, and then there's a negative split lateral term that was justified and is currently pulling this country down, and that is Gorman. So the receptacles of those beings had to be reneuralized and maintained at a better neural ethics scale, or it's going to keep getting downsized. Possibly may have to transverse in an ultra-dimensional effect to reality bending itself.
So is this something that I can participate in by voting? I mean, I know it sounds silly, but is this my job now? There's nothing else I can do, right?
Well, voting, regardless, it's so screwed up in the system now. It's not even going to matter who's going to win, who isn't. What is going to matter, what's going to come next. What can be maintained and managed for mankind. That is why Donald Trump created Space Force, creating a hope and a foundation for the planet. Is why he had co-ops with Nikola Tesla and perimeters to certain events. He's why, not Nikola per se, well, if we get deep down in there, it deals with the Kennedys and other things. So we'll go back on that some other time. But you're going and dealing with him, with Elon Musk. You're dealing with others on the lateral term of pushing the agenda forward and maybe co-creating for other existences on other planets. The certain aperture that is playing their roles currently now, they're going to keep downsizing the gridding system and motivate it into their own world order. And if color spectrums cannot diagnose proper, then really you need to maintain your own color code of ethics upon each realm, instead of justifying negative stances in between. It's not humans and how they're supposed to be maintained for. Humans are created from the higher foundations of source to be better and do better and proact with other species better, not downsize what they are. Just think about that. We're not going to create a negative wavelength. We're not going to pick at each other anymore. Now it needs to come into the lateral terms of the in-between, taking that purple pill, not the red one or the blue one.
That's very interesting. That's interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world today. You need to open your eyes and pay attention, folks. There's stuff going on in Davos. There's stuff going on in this very country here. There's stuff going on in the Middle East. We are living in historical times. There's a lot happening, and I'm going to start documenting things on my own for my own heirs down the line, because who knows who's going to win? Who's going to write they say that the victors write history. You know, if we, and we've seen already with fake news and all sorts of other things going on. So hopefully you're staying abreast of all the world information. I got friends, believe it or not, Blue, that say, "Oh, I don't watch the news. It's too depressing. There's too much going on." I think we really need to. I think that's the thing that's been slowing us down. No, there's hasn't been enough people quick enough to on the uptake to understand what's really going on. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, it also goes into there's the news out there. There's the good and then there's the bad news in between for that. They're putting out false terms, making people believe their propaganda, or they're polarizing something on a positive term, but nobody ain't got the damn common sense to figure it out. We need a justified news standard that will create a better foundation for the planet and not create fear, mayhem, or catastrophe upon each other.
Crazy stuff, because and I know we got to move on, but I saw this thing in Davos and they had this lady. She was some sort of priestess or something from the forest. She was a mother of the forest. She presented herself to. She was an indigenous person apparently, and she did this ceremony on stage with these dignitaries at Davos, and she did this thing where she was coughing into her hands, and then she went and she blew on the forehead of each dignitary, and I'm thinking, wow. We just had all this COVID stuff, and they're trying to ramp something like that up again because it is an election year, and they're letting this lady blow on their forehead. I mean, I love it when they get the timelines or the stories crossed and they don't quite connect, and these little glitches of. Really, that should be reality right there, folks. And I'll put that up in this video in post, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's crazy. The world is crazy right now. Let's get off the crazy world. What are we going to talk about next, Blue?
Well, next thing is Aero Gravitational Subsystem habitats. Subsystem habitats that could possibly create better recreational as well as living speeds for lower agenda codes, and even the creation of maintaining the foundations of what's being lost on the current realm and moving them outwards. These big subsystems, they would hold vital creatures, they would hold vital habitats, including regions itself that could have lakes. It could have a co-op system through fields, and even lower amounts of rock and cannons. Of course, this type of star unit would be maintained in space. That means it wouldn't land. Its aerodynamics field, if it did, it would have lower subunits that would incline to connect to the main starboard unit and prophesize to putting into replicated lower speeds of animals, plants, foliage, and other subspecies. This is a way to maybe motivate and move things through the exoplanets too, as well, and the subsystems. Humans got to understand this planet is being taken away. A lot of the ecosystem has been taken away out of this planet. A lot of creatures are dying off because of the current administration. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. It's not just them, but there's too much on a polarized stream of moving something that's destroying more. We got to cooperate with the systems that we are justified for. Great technologies would help motivate portal standards for other things, subsidize as star bases through Elon Musk, maintaining that the generation that he wants, and others to maintain for the next wavelength for mankind and the other subspecies here. Polarizing that there are several planets out there that could be intaked on a good zoning effect. Not overtaking ones that are already habitual, but ones that it could be maintained for. Cosmic standards, there is hope for mankind. Can something like this be created? Darn well it can. Look at what Elon did. So don't tell me it can't. We have different ways to motivate.
as you're telling me about this, I'm having flashbacks to this movie with Matt Damon and Jodie Foster, Elysium. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they basically use the planet Earth for mining and construction and development, and they're draining it of its resources. And up in the sky is this system like you're talking about, and that's where the elites live. That's where the people who are living life, and it's an encapsulated area with lawns and water and gravity inside this. Is that, am I describing exactly what you're talking about there?
No, these are actually ecosystems that only run through with animals, lower life forms that are losing themselves here, and plants and foliage and other subsystems. It's like how humans, how they protect species here, and they have certain wildlife refuge areas. It's similar to that, but it stays in the cosmos. It has pod units that actually go in and out of it and put these creatures in and out and other subspecies of animals and whatnot and plants, so they're able to travel between systems but stay on that main starboard ship. It's like its own ecosystem of a lower habitat, protected by certain laws and standards for mankind for the near future.
You know, and that's, again, we were just talking about in the last segment there about paying attention and a lot going on in the world. We just had a SpaceX launch yesterday. I mean, it's crazy every day. We're fortunate we live in Florida. We get to see and hear a lot about this stuff a lot more often. But I can remember back in the day in the 80s or even the 70s, if a rocket or something went up, that was a big deal. This didn't happen every year. Now it's almost like these things are happening every day. So again, it becomes routine, and we ended up putting it in the back of our mind, and we don't think about it anymore. And it's not that big a deal anymore because it happens it is a big deal, folks. There's a lot going on. And Elon Musk, his name seems to pop up in this every time we do a show. We can't help but bring in Elon Musk, and I find that very fascinating. So do you think that his SpaceX technology, do you think that he has a direct part in this?
Yes, and he deals with the Force, he deals with the Federation, he deals with Space Corps, he deals with Starlink, he deals with a whole bunch of fundamental effects that could help proact and create something for a better barrier for mankind, so they're not being downsized like they are. Humans are creatures that need to be protected, not evaluated and dissected and re-emulated into a different motivational sphere. You don't take parts off to put parts on. You're authorical beings. You live forever. There are different, more better ways to use the neural intake streams than doing that and utilizing your bodies. The Cervix and the Omuamua, which is the ancient civilized certain type of gray terrestrial beings that have been documented and live on a higher habitual ships that look like a rock interface. They have other types of similar beings that use this as a cloaking modification zone, but they also have certain satellite perimeters and other communication perimeters that stand with these types of rock interfaces. They're able to move from one place to the other and get information and data streams off of that. Now, the Oumuamua and the main starport ship that looks like, I'm going to show you guys, it's like long and ovular. Think of like a cigar. And now think about, it's not Pleiadian ship. Pleiadian ships look like that too, but they light up. The interface is different. These types of star units are more rock interface, and they can represent closer to meteors in a way. They have been monitoring the star system clusters for several eons. They're not considered a threat, though. One of the star units may have had them in self-hibernation, too. So very well could have some of these beings, and they're not even awakened. They're sleeping in self-diagnosis stream.
That's crazy. That's crazy stuff. And we did talk about Oumuamua several times in the past. So again, go back and look up in the index, folks, and you'll click right on it, and you'll catch right up if that's new to you. Let's jump into the SCP Foundation.
Yes, SCP 582, Slenderman. I'm sure many people heard about him. And then they go up on Wiki and try to make it a fictional. It's something that's not real. I'll guarantee you that this being is real. I've come across it in a self-diagnosis stream back in, I believe it was either Washington or Oregon at the time. What this being represents is a hyperdimensional iotic effect that can create a negative catastrophe upon human standard codes. It has different mainstreams upon its own being that uses a semi-tentacles to enact upon it on its higher calling code through its body. It could snatch others in the dark. It doesn't have a face, so it's like white. There's no face there, it's all white. Usually it's in a cloak. And the reason why I say it, because it's considering that this SCP would have been a male or female, but an entity itself that can transform into other things.
You know, it's crazy that we're talking about Slenderman because I just saw something on TV about this, and it was a movie. Actually, it was a documentary supposed to be. I think it was like a one of those scripted type things, but about these two girls, and they had this encounter with the Slenderman, and there was killings and all sorts of stuff was going on. I was trying to keep up with it, but I was kind of falling asleep at the time. But it was crazy to me that now here we are talking about this, and then you come out and say, yes, this is a very real thing. This is not a wiki thing. Is there more than one, or is it just one?
From what I know, there's only one main entity, because he's like a godlike creature, and he uses different avatars. Like I said, he's self-replicating the different specification codes. It makes it harder to get to his actual form. As far as we know, he's being self-monitored by the SCP Foundation, and the designation speed can take off from its own perimeters, even if they try to lock it up. It has a hyperdimensional portal effect if it needs to create and go into other indicating speeds. If there were similar creatures like the main entity of this one, they would be on a lower code module, but there's only one main entity of Slenderman itself.
So does he? It seemed to me in a presentation I was watching for a few minutes there anyway, that it seemed to be just children that were a target. Or just children were able to see him, or just children happened to see him. Is that so?
Yes, they mainly go for that because of the energetic recalling codes and being able to take them into other dimensions and utilize them for another purpose. There's another reason as well. It will go after adults if it feels threatened, or if it feels like it needs to create an inferior adoxics wave. This being would be considered Keter on the programs of the SCP Foundation. That means you do not mess with it. You don't want to mess with it. They need to find a way to get rid of it, because it would fundamentally keep causing problems, and it is actual extraterrestrial being, and it's not in a good wavelength. It's co-op to certain artisan zones that dealt with MIB and personnel in the back stories of that too, through certain timelines, because it had caused so many problems. It had caused at least numeric amounts of deaths when it goes into manifestation processes. And it has different manifestation processings: alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon, zeta, zeta prime. And I believe Zeta Prime's the worst. The one before that, they resulted in 358 deaths in a localized restructuring event. So you don't want to mess with this being. It does more than just screw with children. It can cause catastrophic events depending on what is formed into. When it's that main form of what it is as the entity it goes after, but it can transform into other entities. There has been proof of a spider-like creature on a building a few years ago. I'm not sure from what sector it was that they took a video of, but that was very close to the articulated scale, if not itself in another form. It took off almost the whole building, crawling alongside it, and then disappeared, went into the shadows and blended in. It can do that. It can transform, and it can use interdimensional movement speeds.
Crazy stuff. What's next for us? What's the next SCP we're going to talk about?
6050. Colored lakes. 6050 is foundation designation for Telaga Warma, a freshwater lake located in Borgo, West Java, Indonesia. The lake has a surface area of 2.68 kilometers and a maximum depth of 13.5 meters. SCP-6050 is known for changing its coloration periodically by the public. So what happens when the changing and the alternations of the lake? It also happens with the weather anomalies surrounding. And there are some peoples and or tribes or other lower articulated zones that would create an energetic effect and try to manipulate it through their own, because they feel it's funded from a higher entity. But by doing this, it could cause worse catastrophes around the area and widespread. Now, the color cycles that deal with it depend on the month. We got the first cycle, January through 5th of March. Deep sky, blue color. Water temperature, 8.15 degrees Celsius. Second cycle, 6 through March, November. Spring green. Water temperature, 18.8. Third cycle, November to December. Red color. Water temperature, 33.5. And the fourth cycle is 31st of December, and it's a black Russian color. And it has extreme rate of landing waves on the lake. So around that time, that means it could be a higher definition of negative catastrophes or negative elevated effects because of the monitorization of the weather in that area.
So I'm a little bit taken back here. I think a lake as a stationary thing, and like anything else, if something is not for me, I'm going to stay away from it. Can I just stay away from this? How does it affect me? Or how would it affect me if it wasn't secured and contained?
Well, it's only activated in certain timelines of the year. And there are quantities with heavy rains and other articulated zones depending on those timelines. But there are also times of the year that it's on a conjuncture and plateau where it's elevated. Numeric elevation codes also go through the Agarthan realms. This type of lake may more or less co-op with another portalized event, and it brings into the variations of the color streams as well as the higher elemental indoxes, paranormal effects of the area. We talked about buildings, how they created paranormal indexing effects and other types of internal data streams. Chernobyl, depending on its elemental biowave movement stream, can create infusement or color deferment modes, as well as deferment modes depending on the radiation levels there. This is different because it's a different type of element. And the biowave matter deals with bioluminescence and ion particleization zones. In the remission wavelengths, it is an actual entity that grasps itself within the lake. It's monitored, but it's considered Euclid. It's not considered an ultimated danger. It's in between.
So if I saw this lake of colors, it would definitely be in one of these hues. It wouldn't just blend in like a normal lake.
Well, it's monitored all the time. I mean, it's in a certain set area. They really can't move it. So they have others of the Foundation monitor on certain time zones and see where their peripheral event goes. They have to make sure that no one messes with the electromagnetic field frequencies and impulses around the area too. And depending upon the disturbance lines that correlate between that and the inner realms will depend on how high the inflection levels go through it. It could be also considered a wonder of the world, but the only negative cause is just the higher elementals in certain timeline events. If they can actually find a way to stabilize that, it would be awesome to have a semi-colored lake throughout the timeline zones that changes and alternates its variation streams.
Wow, it's crazy stuff that we're talking about here. And one more I see we got, what is a mirrored shipwreck?
SCP-2319, mirrored shipwreck of the Titanic, but its polarized indexing wave goes on the other side of the perimeters of the matrix. Mirrored shipwreck has paranormal accounts, and it has items on a paranormal and peripheral accounts that affect. And it makes you think, like going back to, we talked about this, about that, the problem that had happened with Titanic and the submersible and how it had problems. I believe that there could have been a co-op through this and the mirrored effect that translated on a negative peripheral or electromagnetic inversion line.
Is this something that I will stumble across, or is this something I'll never stumble across?
It's something that's being monitored by certain Foundation members. And just like you would think about going with the Bermuda Triangle and how they have disturbances upon the field, it's similar to that. They have disturbances and paranormal accounts upon the field. And for their study, they're not been able to pick up some of the elementals that are being self-diagnosed upon a certain wreckage itself. It is an ultra-dimensional timeline link to the actual real wreckage. So it is split into two intervals. There are several other intake streams out there, whether they're buildings, whether they are vehicles, whether they are beings, but they have a cutoff scene between two-dimensional vortexes. So one can create more of a negative stance than the other, or pull something in than the other does, or the other is co-op to a scene of where you wanted to believe what it was, but it was actually set into a more of a paranormal example. The Titanic and the inverse effect of what happened to the perimeters between this and the lost ship itself are co-op because of what had happened during the time of the Titanic. It created another dimensional rift upon another plateau, if you will.
And what do we have to report from your positions with the Space Force and the Federation?
Well, we got two different things to talk about, Mike. We got the solar UFO activities and the portals. Now, they have been recently activating and pointing outwards, including certain military and foundations itself, of things coming in and out of the sun. Reciprocal events received recent intergalactic solar activities via platonic polarity field bursts in UFO star Andromeda and portal access layers. Extra-dimensional ports were set off and electromagnetic frequencies drew back semi-intact biome fields that may have corrupted several inter-hemispheric diametrics, which can tear the outer space-time continuum platform if not monitored properly. The reasons why there have been numerous star units or black spots in representation to the sun itself get to do with Nibiru X and Nibiru Y in conjunction, which are still in self-hibernation. They are monitoring, and us in the force has self-monitorization of what Nibiru could end up doing if it goes back out of hibernation. We don't want that. So as of September 2023 is when it's had top monitor since then. For any extra radioactivity or radioactive activity that would have been polarized upon the matrix around that time and into the definitive times around here. And it also goes into another thing we are discussing, the electromagnetic impulse fields through the force and dealing with what these negative beings are causing through megahertz standards on mankind. Military Space Force Department dealt with designated electro impulse waves against negative megahertz standards on a higher wavelength. And they are certain to deal and do with zones of the administration and create and co-op through much higher elevated electromagnetic hertzes, which is not good for the engrams of mankind. It can screw them up real bad. They have actually polarized on higher elevation speeds, about 600 to 780 to 800 megahertz. Humans cannot stand that. They're only able to stand between 200 to 400 tops. If you don't believe me, you can see how much of an electromagnetic impulse is being polarized upon the field in certain areas, especially in cities. The intake zones, even around the correlated areas that you're in, you're going to notice. This is the reason why they're dealing with network and on the TVs, in the news, and broadbanding everything outwards. It's a part of a Hertz frequency that they're distributing to ensnare the minds. There are certain frequencies through that as well.
And now it's time for one of the favorite parts of the show, ET of the Week.
Yes, ET of the Week. The Zionion and Circons are passive extra-dimensional terrestrials that provide extra support through protected hypermolecular healing magnetism and particle data grid storage modes. Heights range from about 8.5 feet to 9 feet to relation of Circon Cervix, as well as other semi-species that range from 1.8 feet to 2.9 feet for interdimensional setbacks. So there are two different sequencing codes to different types of species. The setback codes that go through the lower encoding effects that are smaller go through the Sebit T9, the Sebit 9. They have dark brown skin closer to rhinos, and desert regions fabricates its linear physicology codes to dynamics to other galaxies, but the Milky Way itself. So they do not have a mainframe and designation code that correlates with a certain aperture of this current one, but their dynamics reroute into others, making it currently non-existent to this timeline and galaxy. Sustainable development supports eating habits of micro-infused material agents. These beings are two different cymatic forms. The ones that are much taller are more in correlation to this timeline. The ones that are more smaller in correlation to the Earth and timeline tables, other dimensions.
So are these good guys or bad guys? I'm a little confused, sorry.
They're good. They're considered under the Federation of the Galactic Cosmic Standards.
All right. Do I have anything to fear at all from these beings?
No.
They're here to help.
Yeah, well, they're non-existent polarity scores mainly to this own timeline indexing suite. They deal with numerous other timelines, but they have definition scores of a higher interval of subspecies that are close to the receptacle here, that are taller. But think about communication between one platform to the other. They still have communicative barriers between each other's species, so they know what's going on.
Wow. And just like that, we're out of time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And Blue, thank you for Thank you for episode 42.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. We'll talk again soon.
Yep.